When there are ample earthly flats to lie on, what is the necessity of cots and beds? When one can use his own arms, what is the necessity of a pillow? When one can use the palms of his hands, what is the necessity of varieties of utensils? When there is ample covering, or the skins of trees, what is the necessity of clothing? Purport. The necessities of life for the protection and comfort of the body must not be unnecessarily increased. Human life is spoiled in a vain search after such illusory happiness. If one is able to lie down on the floor, then why should one endeavor to get a good bedstead or soft cushion to lie on? If one can rest without any pillow and make use of the soft arms endowed by nature, there is no necessity of searching after a pillow. If we make a study of the general life of the animals, we can see that they have no intelligence for building big houses, furniture, and other household paraphernalia. And yet they maintain a healthy life by laying down on the open land. They do not know how to cook or prepare foodstuff, yet they still live healthy lives more easily than the human being. This does not mean that human civilization should revert to animal life, or that the human being should live naked in the jungles without any culture, education, and sense of morality. An intelligent human cannot live the life of an animal. Rather, man should try to utilize his intelligence in arts and science, poetry and philosophy. In such a way he can further the progressive march of human civilization. But here the idea given by Srila Shukadeva Goswami is that the reserve energy of human life, which is far superior to that of animals, should simply be utilized for self-realization. Advancement of human civilization must be towards the goal of establishing our lost relationship with God, which is not possible in any form of life other than the human. One must realize the nullity of the material phenomena, considering it a passing phantasmagoria, and must endeavor to make a solution to the miseries of life. Self-complacence with a polished type of animal civilization, geared to sense gratification, is delusion, and such a civilization is not worthy of the name. In pursuit of such false activities, a human being is in the clutches of Maya, or illusion. Great sages and saints in the days of yore were not living in palatial buildings furnished with good furniture and so-called amenities of life. They used to live in huts and groves and sit on the flat ground, and yet they have left immense treasures of high knowledge with all perfection. Srila Rupa Goswami and Srila Sanatana Goswami were high-ranking ministers of state, but they were able to leave behind them immense writings on transcendental knowledge, while residing only for one night underneath one tree. They did not live even 2 nights under the same tree, and what to speak of well-furnished rooms with modern amenities. And still they were able to give us most important literatures of self-realization. So-called comforts of life are not actually helpful for progressive civilization. Rather, they are detrimental to such progressive life. In the system of Sanatana Dharma, of 4 divisions of social life and 4 orders of progressive realization, there are ample opportunities and sufficient directions for a happy termination of the progressive life, and the sincere followers are advised therein to accept a voluntary life of renunciation in order to achieve the desired goal of life. If one is not accustomed to abiding by the life of renunciation and self-abnegation from the beginning, one should try to get into the habit at a later stage of life, as recommended by Srila Shukadeva Goswami, and that will help one to achieve the desired success. Sacham kshitao kim kashipo prayasaya bahao swaside kupabarhanai kim sachanjalao kim purudhana patria digvalkaladao satikim dekulai. When there are ample earthly flats to lie on, what is the necessity of cots and beds? When one can use his own arms, what is the necessity of a pillow, when one can use the palms of his hands, what is the necessity of varieties of utensils? When there is ample covering, or the skins of trees, what is the necessity of clothing? So the earth provides us with almost everything we require. Almost means the human being requires something more than that which can simply be derived from the earth. So in that way he's different than the animal. The animal only requires that which comes from the earth. All the necessities of life are supplied by Mother Earth. This description is a description given by a great renounced sage, the most renounced, Shukadeva Goswami, to other sages who are accustomed to this lifestyle and who don't feel any disturbance by it. Those persons were trained either from the beginning of life in the principles of renunciation and had accepted them throughout their life without any change, or they had accepted these principles later on due to the fact of their coming to this realization or coming to a certain age by which they were to accept renunciation, and thus they accepted the life of austerity. Such a life is one wherein the necessities of life are minimized. And in fact, in this verse, we find that the life and the life necessities has similarity to the animal existence in the sense that the maintenance of the body is nothing more than a procedure of eating, sleeping, mating, and defending. So, to sleep, one just requires a flat place. The ground provides a place for sleeping. For a pillow, one may use his arms. In fact, Prabhupada once told me that a real brahmachari will lie down outside with nothing under the ground, on the ground, and no covering, and not feel disturbed by the cold. Of course, this is in India, where the temperature is a little bit different than here. However, there are places in northern India where it gets quite cold, where the temperature is not much different than here. And still, there were saintly personalities who were living up there, the foothills of the Himalaya mountains, and even within the mountain itself, and were not disturbed by the cold. Of course, they also were performing different yogic processes by which their bodily temperature was increased. It's not that you can just go out there and live like an animal. You're going to die of exposure and all kinds of problems. So this is not what we're recommending. You must also know the art. Similarly, as far as eating, they were not having to worry about eating or getting utensils, for they would just go pick the berries from the tree. Of course, you would need a tree with berries on it in order to do that. And there are various leaves which one can eat, just growing wildly. Sometimes there are things which we consider weeds, if we see them in India, but they make a very good sabji. Therefore, India is called Punya Bhumi, the place for the performance of pious activities, because without much difficulty one can live anywhere and somehow maintain his life. And after all, in the yogic practice, the austerity requires that one reduce the bodily necessities of life. So, such saintly personalities were able to live in this most renounced fashion. Even in Vrindavan, where it gets quite cold in the winter. It goes down to 0 or -1 sometimes, -2 on a rare day. The Goswamis of Vrindavan were living in the most simple fashion. Not even under the same tree for 2 nights in a row. Every night a new tree. Because they didn't want to get attached to the tree and start to establish for themselves some place of residence under the tree. So, such kind of renunciation, if it's even heard by the Westerners, causes them to shake in fear. Therefore, we don't find these principles being pushed too much in our Krishna consciousness movement, because then there wouldn't be anybody in the Krishna consciousness movement. Then how would the preaching go on? Therefore, according to the time, places, and circumstances, the principles of austerities are adjusted according to the requirements of the people who are to perform Krishna consciousness. In other words, if one is too much attached in a certain way, to simply demand of him, give up all attachment, this will not be very successful. In fact, it will be considered as a great annoyance. Prabhupada commented when he came to America for the first time, and he wasn't sure what the Westerners would think. So when he was preaching, he was very much afraid to mention no illicit sex, no meat, fish, or eggs, no intoxication, and no gambling, because he thought as soon as he mentioned these things, everybody would get up and leave and say, "Thank you very much, Swami, now you can go home. You've come and said what you wanted to say, now you can just go home." So he thought they would say like that. And in fact, nowadays, they may even say like that. But at that time, he was surprised that they didn't say like that. And they liked this. But that fear is there, because it is so radical, just this little bit of austerity, and this austerity of our four rules and regulations does not represent austerity in general. In India, most persons would not consider this a great austerity. Of course, unless they live in the city and have been spoiled. But in the villages, nobody would consider this as a big austerity. They would consider, well, this is human life. So, this big austerity which we are performing is factually simply human life. Then when it comes to austerity, well, then we're talking about something heavy. Shukadeva Goswami is saying here, the flat earth is there. You don't have to worry for a bed. Lie down on the earth. And who needs a pillow when you can use your arms? After all, the human form of life is not meant for sleeping. And as far as eating is concerned, if you can prepare it with your hands, then you can take it. Otherwise, why bother? For Shukadeva Goswami, he didn't even come near fire. He would not even cook anything. Just taking leaves or berries from the trees which are already there. Roots are available too, if you know which root to eat. You can eat roots. If you eat the wrong one, you can also kill yourself. Therefore, one must have knowledge which roots to eat. There are also some barks on trees, certain trees, which are edible. So one can live all right, without a problem, if one knows the art and one is inclined to do so. So Shukadeva Goswami is extremely renounced. He didn't even bother with clothes. Of course, he says here, when the skin of trees is there, the bark of the tree, then you don't have to worry about getting clothes. You can just take this bark of the tree and somehow tie it together and wear that. Otherwise, if you don't even want to bother with that, like Shukadeva Goswami, you don't have to bother. just wander without any necessity of life. Because it's inconceivable to the Western mind. But it is possible for those who are extremely renounced and austere. Yeah. One develops this from birth. Therefore, sometime Prabhupada has made statements about some of our Indian devotees. Specifically, he also said this in relationship to Bhakti Shri Swami. He said, he's born more qualified. Because in the Western society, we are born into Malacha society. And as far as the Indian society, one is born into a more high-class society simply by the fact that it's coming from India. Of course, one can train culture. And thus, the devotee who actually follows all of these rules and regulations becomes vastly superior to any materialist in any country on this world. However, the culture here is that one should try to get as much sense gratification as possible. And then he will enjoy very nicely. And therefore, Shukadeva Goswami's instructions will not be heard. Therefore, we do not preach. Can you imagine if we make a preaching program and then we tell everybody in the audience, what is the need of your beds? Just go sleep outside in the backyard. You don't need clothes. Of course, they'll like this. In the summertime especially, they'll think this is very good. But in the winter also, you don't need, you just take the bark of tree. And you can just pick some leaves and berries and eat that. People will just stand up and walk out. In unison, they will get up. Of course, now you can also make another higher level. You can make a fire. And those who utilize the fire, they have one pot. Even for sannyasi, he has one pot. And with that pot he may take water and also boil vegetables. Dal also. Or he will also in that fire, when the fire gets lower, just with his hands, make some bread balls, and put them in the dying embers of the fire. And then it will cook and become some hard bread. Like that. Yeah. And then you can put that inside your dal or inside your sabji, which is just simply boiled water and vegetables. And that way it gets soft again. And then you can eat this. This is the meal of the sadhu. Yeah. Very, very simple. We know the story of Sanatana Goswami offering to his deity like that. Just these bread balls, hard bread balls. And his deity was complaining. Why are you feeding me these horrible bread balls? Hard. Sanatana Goswami said, I'm very old and I have no way to prepare anything else, so you'll just have to accept that. That's all I've got. And the deity said, all right. So, one can also, with the palm of hands, produce things like this. You can rip vegetables with your fingers. You don't need a knife. There's actually no need to cut a vegetable with a knife, after all. The point is to make it in small pieces so it cooks better. So if you can do it with your fingers, then it's also all right. Yeah. You don't actually need to cut it with a knife. You can just break it. Yeah. Of course, it gets a little difficult. It's not so cultured. But, in fact, someday you may have to live like that. Someday, let us say if they blow up the whole world one day, do you think the kitchen will be upstairs with all of the things on the shelf and the gas will come? Gas man will bring the gas and the water will pour from the faucet when you turn it. Where will you get water from? Then one says, well, we'll just walk to the river. The nice clean river. And then cook with what? Oh, no gas. Oh, have to get some wood. Get wood in Heidelberg. Where do you get wood from? So then, all right, you finally find some wood by chopping up some chairs. Then, where do you burn it? In the kitchen, there's only electric stoves and gas stoves. And then what do? What do you cook? The leaves of the trees? One goes to the store, there is no store. What does he cook? Modern civilization is on a very tenuous foundation. This means at any moment you can lose the whole thing. Then what will one do? Just a couple of little bombs here and there. Then what will one do? One may have to be forced to live such a life of renunciation. Then, of course, it doesn't help. Living a renounced life by force doesn't bring spiritual advancement. Therefore, the idea is that one should accept it voluntarily. But then again, we find that amongst the various yogis, they accept austerities to become very powerful in mystic process. But then, at the end, after suffering, then they come to the point where they can enjoy these mystic powers. So they are suffering in order to enjoy. That kind of austerity is worthless. One should not take up suffering in order to come to some position of enjoyment. One may take up the principles of austerity only for the purpose of self-realization. Therefore, to this end, we are reaching directly for self-realization, and the austerities become a servant of the process of self-realization. This is why we engage in the preaching mission, because this is austerity, and we must have austerity. When one accepts the austerity of the preaching mission, then that austerity will give one advancement in spiritual life. So that austerity must be accepted. And when one accepts that austerity, then that austerity brings him to the spiritual platform, and ultimately back home, back to Godhead. So, austerity must be performed. It is in fact purifying even for the great souls. Therefore, one must always be engaged in austerity, never making too comfortable a situation. Then, by such engagement, one will be able to come to the perfectional platform. And as one grows older, one should accept more and more austerity. Especially in the last stage of life, one should accept austerity. Maybe some years only, but one should give up the bodily necessities of life. We find everywhere in our Srimad Bhagavatam. And we saw it also in the example of Srila Prabhupada. He simply gave up eating and drinking, with no desire whatsoever for maintaining a body which cannot function without so much endeavor. Some at the last stages of their lives, they cannot digest, so they eat something, then they stick their fingers down their throat and throw up what's left over, which cannot be digested. Others are maintaining their bodies by needles or fluids. But for us, we should just head for Vrindavan or Mayapur Dham and just give up the body there by the acceptance of the final austerities. So at least if maybe we don't have much taste for this right now, maybe when older age comes, Prabhupada says here that if one is not accustomed to abiding by the life of renunciation and self-abnegation from the beginning, I suppose he's talking about us, one should try to get into the habit at a later stage of life, as recommended by Srila Shukadeva Goswami. So the point is to come to the platform. the later stage of life. Therefore, the varnashram system is very scientific. In the beginning, one accepts the life of austerity under the direction of the spiritual master. Brahmachari gurukule vasandantor guror hitam. The brahmachari will work in the ashrama of the spiritual master and will simply act for his satisfaction, work for his benefit. Then, after so and so many years, when the brahmachari is at the stage of life between the ages of 20 and 25, he takes up the householder life, grihastha ashram, where he takes up the responsibility for wife and family, and in this way frees himself gradually from the incessant desire for enjoying in material world up to the point of 50 years. And then he accepts the renunciation of vanaprastha life. And then, even then, he will give up the association of his wife, even in the holy place, and wander in the sannyas order of life. Or he will just maintain the kshetra sannyas, which means living in the holy dham and never leaving it. So it is scientific. It is meant to take one from the point of immaturity through the point of attachment to the point of detachment from this material world. Therefore, it is a very scientific process. And it should be accepted in this human society, except by some very rare souls who may go directly from the brahmachari stage to the sannyas stage, like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Prabhupada, who was Naishtika brahmachari throughout his whole life and simply transformed from brahmachari to sannyas. For him there was no difference. But for everyone else in this world, we find that these scientific distinctions in life, in the varnashram system, are very perfect, because they gradually bring one through these stages of life. However, the problem is that you have 50% chance to go back to Godhead in the grihastha stage. 100% chance in the brahmachari stage. We found in the history of various countries, Germany being no exception, that perhaps the number is less than 50% in the grihastha stage. Maybe 20%. In other words, taking up the grihastha ashram sometime may be seen to be like gambling with one's life. But then again, not taking up the grihastha ashram is sometimes seen like gambling with one's life. So what can you do? This is the material world. And everything in this material world is more or less crazy. Because that is the nature of this material world. Very, very complex, difficult place. Therefore, one should just do whatever he can do to be Krishna conscious. In whatever way he can get himself back home, back to Godhead, he should do that. And what therefore Prabhupada mentioned in the 8th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, in whatever ashram or whatever status of life, varna or ashram, one must situate himself comfortably in that varna or ashrama which fits him best. And thus, one will be able to make progressive advancement in the human form of life. Therefore, these varnashram principles are actually very important because they regulate. They help one to accept a status which is comfortable for him. And such a status, when one accepts this, will be very satisfying. You don't find in the, for instance, histories like Mahabharata, that anybody was lamenting about his occupational duty too much. Oh, maybe sometimes when the Kshatriyas were forced to accept killing somebody they didn't want to, they said, to hell with the business of a Kshatriya. But that is not their main thought. Just every now and then they felt like that. Everybody feels like that. But in general, this system is scientific. And one knows this is my position, I should accept. But nowadays everything's all mixed up. Everybody takes any old position anywhere without any understanding of whether you should do it or not. And as far as the ashram sciences are concerned, they're completely lost. People think the Grihastha ashram simply for having sex life and nothing more. And cooking pizza pies, etc. I won't get into it today, I'm sorry. And therefore, scientific society is destroyed. So gradually we have to somehow come to the point of reestablishing these scientific divisions of life. Then there's a possibility that things will go on in this movement. Yeah. So therefore, one should always be meditating on how to gradually transfer the principles to these scientific principles. And then there's a great possibility that there will be success. All right, Hare Krishna.